everybody, I am Zenith will rule, and welcome back to the Disney debate where Y2 staller Kat Macberrie and I discuss Disney films, Disney products, and anything else related to Disney. And today we are delving into a film that it is infamous on the internet. When we were looking this one up, we knew nothing about it. We were just like, okay, well, we know this, we know Pollyanna, we know some of this other stuff. We obviously knew Zorro, but then we came to this film called 10 Who Dared. And according to the Wikipedia page, it was one of Disney's worst films. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I'll brace myself. I'll grab a beer. I'll enjoy it because I tend to do this stuff like immediately after work. I work at night, and I come home and I usually just watch a movie that I need to review in the coming days. So I figured if it's bad, I'll just relax, I'll grab a beer, and I was not prepared. Now, me, Eric, and Kat, we all have different opinions on this film. I'm a lot more harsh on it than anyone else in the group. Kat just decided to bow out of this one. I mean, obviously we're rotating in between the two of us, but she kind of did this as revenge for Eric giving us what was that film in Elseworlds month? Mirror Mirror. So this is her revenge. She prepared a statement that she's not gonna be here. She's not going to be here for one of the worst Disney films ever made. However, when she actually watched it to make the title card, because she makes all the title cards, she said, "You know what? You kind of oversold it, Zen." I'm like, but I had beer and I kept pausing it at every 10 minutes just to yell because it was so bad. I don't know. That's me personally, but we're going to get into this. Anyway, with all that being said, Eric, how's it going?
It's going good. So 10 Who Dared. Like, I remember in the Facebook chat you were talking about how both you and Kat were saying like how bad this movie is and how it's one of the worst movies that Disney has ever done. I'm like, okay, and I was a little scared going into this because I'm like, okay, what does it mean by having the worst Disney film ever, or claim to having the worst Disney film ever? I'm watching this and I'm sitting there going, well, it's not like horribly, horribly bad, like it insults my intelligence or anything of that matter. I'm watching it and I'm like, it's kind of boring, and it's funny. It kind of reminds me of this one movie that I saw on MST3K called Swamp Diamonds. It's a movie from the early or late 60s. It's directed by Roger Corman. Anybody who's familiar with MST3K knows about Roger Corman and how he makes all these like bland, like horrible, these tedious films, and that's what it reminded me of because in the movie Swamp Diamonds, it's about these women who break out of prison and they're trying to find this stash of valuable diamonds that are buried somewhere in the swamp in the bayou in Louisiana, and it's just them just going up the river or whatever, and it's just kind of it's for the most part kind of boring to watch with some sprouts, and there's some like really bad editing, and that's what this kind of reminds me of, because there's scenes where they're on the river and there's like, you can easily tell they're shot separately, because there's the wide shot of the guys in the boats going down the river. You see the stuntmen and going down the river in a wide shot, and and that's filmed on the Colorado River itself. So you can see them, going down the river. You clearly could tell that's real. And then they do the close-up shots, and the close-up shots of them, you could tell that it's just a boat in a studio, behind they didn't have a green screen back then, so it was like a projector and on a screen like behind them, and with occasionally having like water, like just somebody throwing buckets of water at them, and you can easily tell. You can easily tell that it's fake, and I'm watching this. I'm like, it's like Swamp. It's like in Swamp Diamonds where where one of the girls falls into the river, and when they cut to the girl in the river, you could clearly tell that was shot in a pool. Like it was perfectly clear. And it cuts back, and like you have the dirty water, and then it cuts back to the woman. Because like a gator is coming after him or whatever, but you could clearly tell that it was shot in a pool, and that's what that moment reminded me of, where they're just two separate shots that don't really match up. I understand the technology was limited back then, but looking at it now, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, like, we're gonna get more into the effect work in a little bit, but when you had a film like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that looks miles better when it was made like years before, and this is just so obvious in how bad the effects are. Like that was one of the annoyances. I mean, admittedly it is kind of funny, but after a while I started getting annoyed by it because none of the scenes kind of matched up to each other. But I do want to stress that this is not the worst Disney movie we have seen. I still think the Shaggy Dog remake is the worst that we've seen for this show. Would you agree with that?
It's that, and for me, it's that or Light in the Forest.
Yeah.
Because Light in the Forest, that was just that was just so insensitive. Like now, looking at it. I mean, with 10 Who Dared, it's not so much boring, but also when the stuff is interesting, like the characters, they just do some really dumb things.
I think the biggest cardinal sin of this film is that it is so boring, and even when it tries to do something with the story or the characters or the conflict or anything, it's barely a blip. Like it's not even registered as like a thing that happens, and that's just how quickly everything is. But in my opinion, here's the scale of how bad movies go. The worst a bad movie can be is both boring and infuriating, and that's what something like The Light in the Forest, Savage Sam, and the Shaggy Dog remake have in common. They're boring and they're infuriating. Right underneath that, like a film that's just plain boring is bad. Like that's worse than simply being infuriating, because something can be infuriating and get me angry and we can have a good episode on it. But when something's boring, like just boring, not boring and infuriating, a lot of the time there's not as much to talk about. So, like, it goes, a film just being okay to being bad to being infuriating, boring, and then boring and infuriating. That's my scale, personally, especially because if I have to watch this and, like, take mental notes and pay as much attention, I don't like to look at my watch every 10 minutes. And if it can be infuriating while boring, that's kind of a feat. This film doesn't quite get to the heights of something like, the worst films we've seen, because this is just plain boring, but also I think it's inept on so many levels. It is very poorly made, it's very poorly executed, effect-wise it's bad, acting-wise, these people all have the weirdest accents that are all so fake, but Eric, let's actually get into the plot of the film. Can you give us like just a brief summary of what this film is about?
Sure. 10 Who Dared is actually based off of a true story that was taken from the journal of former U.S. Army officer John Wesley Powell. And what it is that what this journal was was the account of him and 9 other men attempting to map out the Colorado River, because there was parts of the Colorado River that wasn't mapped out. So he wanted to go and try to get to the parts of the Colorado River that was left uncharted, because there were still parts of it that hasn't been explored before. And he led an expedition back in 1869 to try to chart that, him and 9 other men. So, and this is basically taken from, and the whole film is based on his journal and his journey down the Colorado River and through the Grand Canyon and whatnot, and all of his findings and whatnot. And what they did, and throughout this film, there's a bunch of the other gentlemen that are with him, includes Powell's brother, some British guy who's here for all the excitement and glory and fame. There's one guy who's like a recovering alcoholic. There's a former Southern military, former Southern soldier, basically a Confederacy soldier, basically because this was in 1869. This was 4 years after the end of the Civil War, and so there was still some tension there, and we'll get to that later. And there was a bunch of other people who were there to basically just help him out, and one guy who's like big on like astrology and stuff. So you have all these cast of characters, and they're all traveling down on three or four boats, and they're just going down the river, and they're all on this journey, and along the way there's spots of character development / conflict, as well as spouts of just shots of just people going down the river, and maybe and some scenic shots, and that's generally what happens. They go down the river, then they stop, something happens, they go down the river again, they stop, something else happens, and just goes on. This goes on for like an hour and a half. But it felt like 3 hours.
It felt very, very long, and that, I think, one of the biggest issues I have is the whole point of the movie is them charting this uncharted territory by going down the river. And first of all, they don't actually show why this river is uncharted territory. They say, oh, people have died on this journey before, but the terrain isn't very dangerous from what they're showing us. And they try to make up for that by having conflict between these weird, caricatures of people. Because you have, this Englishman, you have this Scottish or Irish guy, you have a recovering alcoholic, and all this just random people kind of shoved in together to create kind of a conflict. But the conflict between these characters is just kind of weak, because they try to make up for the fact that they don't have a lot of adventure or any problems along the journey by giving the conflict between the characters. So you have the Englishman encouraging the alcoholic to drink for some reason. It's never stated why. And then they start fighting, and then it's resolved immediately afterwards. Or you have something brought up in an earlier scene for 5 seconds to foreshadow something that'll happen in the next scene, and then that entire plot thread is dropped. And I'm like, this is horribly done conflict. These characters are very one-dimensional, and the fact that everything you see from them in the first 5 minutes are just so one note. You learn everything you need to know about them, and the way they're introduced is what really got me, because the first 5 minutes I checked out because they have this journalist on the edge of the sea, and instead of talking to them before they start departing, he yells at them as they're going to the boats, and they shout their names back at them, and I'm like, what? This is so forced.
Mm-hmm. Well, they got to get the plot going along, because, you got to go down that river. It ain't going to go down by itself.
But if they're going to introduce the characters, why not have the characters introduce themselves through the story instead of shouting at a journalist?
Well, it's only an hour and a half, 90-minute film, so they have to squeeze it in somehow. I don't have a good explanation. I'm sorry, but no, but I see your point. Like, there could have been like time where they're like setting up the boats and they cut to the different guys interacting, but they just kind of like skipped ahead with that. Was just, oh, they're in the boats, let's go. They're like, who are you? Oh, and who are you? And you? All right, okay, let's go. That was it.
Yeah, like it all seems like there could have been more setup, and if they were going to just bring us right into it, then have them introduce them along the way, because honestly, I couldn't name more than like one character. There was like someone named like Oberon or something like that, but that was just because he had a weird name. And that's the only reason I remembered who he was. The only person that really stood out that wasn't really a caricature was the Major himself. He's a one-armed general. Well, not one-armed. His hand has been cut off, probably from the war.
Yeah, that was John Powell himself. Yeah.
John Powell, yeah. And I think what works about him is that he's so into what he's doing. Like, he keeps going off the trail, and he keeps saying, oh, there's some interesting geologic formations, and this is the purpose of the trip. And I'm like, okay, I like this guy. Like, if this was going to be a film about, like, archaeology and stuff, I would be for that, because at least that's a goal, that's a purpose. But that's only, like, 5% of the film, and ultimately we don't really learn a lot of his discoveries aside from some fossils. The film decides that the characters are more important than the archaeology.
I mean, they could have done both. They could have tied that in a little bit better, but I felt like they put too much. They put a little too much in the characters. I mean, it would have been fine if it was something interesting, but it wasn't, because as soon as something got interesting, they just kind of like shut it off right away. Like, they kind of resolved it by itself, and we don't hear about it for the rest of the film. So it's like, okay, so are we? So and you're also doing fossils. Okay, that's cool, but like, that would, like, we're kind of repeating ourselves, but it's like, as soon as it does something interesting, it like shuts itself off. Like, it's afraid to kind of branch itself out. Like, there's some interesting stuff in here. There's some interesting stuff in it. Like, there's a lot they could have played around with, but they just didn't. Maybe they spent too much money on trying to get the filming with like trying to get the boats down the Colorado and stuff. With trying to get those kind of shots, but maybe they could have put a little bit more time in the story.
There's clearly stuff that you can latch on to, and I don't think this is the worst movie ever made, because there are a couple things that I think is interesting for character development if executed correctly. For example, the Major Powell's brother, he basically used to be in the war, and he got trapped by Southerners who were rebelling, and he pretty much turned more savage because he tried to escape and he got caught by them and he was tortured. So that is understandable, and when he thinks there's a Southern rebel in their midst, even though the war is over, he kind of like goes into war mode all over again. And there is a little bit of interesting development with that. But first of all, what really infuriated me about the execution is that they never confirm that this guy is actually a from the South. They never actually say that he is a Southern rebel and fought in the war. Like, he could have just been from the South, and like they never confirm this. And then so when he goes and tries to shoot this guy for no reason, it just like I kept looking at him. I'm saying, confirm your facts. And I mean, thankfully this guy doesn't hold a grudge and they eventually make up, but it's a conflict that could have worked, but it ultimately fizzles out, and it's not handled as well as it could have.
I mean, it's funny when I look at that conflict. I immediately thought of Firefly, and how like the whole premise of the world of Firefly was that the inspiration that Joss Whedon had was the American Civil War, and like the Southerners who lost, the Confederacy, who ended up losing the war, and those people who felt like they weren't on the wrong side at all, and that kind of resentment. And that was the first thing that came to my mind. Like, Firefly kind of did it a little bit better, in which the brown coats still had like resentment for it, but they still try to find a way to like move on and stuff. Like, that could have been something a little bit interesting here with 10 Who Dared, but it just kind of go on the whole, this whole, the war, for some people the war is never over, and blah blah, and blah blah blah, and the other guy's like, no, this is like, well, I'm through fight, like, I'm not gonna fight you, and he's like, no, you're gonna fight me, and da da da, and it's just this back and forth. It's just kind of, it could have gone deeper, but it didn't. It just kind of went, oh, this guy still thinks the war's going on. This guy doesn't. That's about it.
It's really unfortunate because, like I said, this could have been something more, and it's not. And that's kind of like a lot of the character interaction in a nutshell. Like the whole stuff with the alcoholic. This could have actually led to something deeper, like maybe this guy who's forcing him to drink again was wronged by him somehow, or something like that. But nope, he just does it for no reason, and somehow he knows he's an alcoholic for some reason. Like this, they don't delve into this at all. And there's a whole thing where the Scottish or Irish guy has a dog aboard his ship, and they're like, oh, we can't bring it aboard. And so they say, oh, he'll be eaten by the wolves, so we'll go and kill him. But nope, that conflict is resolved. The major can't bring himself to kill the dogs, so the dog's around for the journey. And like these little events, like they just should be part of the main force of the film. They should be what this film is staked on, because this is a character film. Otherwise, there's nothing going on of them going down the river, and it's just like Journey to the Center of the Earth as a book worked because you had a group of people going towards a goal, and even though it had parts that were a little bit boring, it was all about the discovery of this new terrain and trying to get to this end goal, and seeing what's going on around you and the wonder of everything. And they touch upon that briefly here, but this tries to be a character piece, and it fails. Especially because, like, there's one character who I really don't like, who the whole film, he has this book, and he says, oh, I've been studying the stars, and it says this and this and this, and he's reading this from a book. I don't know how this works. Maybe it's like an astrology book.
I think it's an astrology book because he talks about like the position of the stars and whether they'll have good luck or not. Like, so I think it's more astrological.
Okay, so that makes sense. Now he's trying to make you think he's like a really wise person, And for the first part of the film, like, he's like, helping out the major and this and that, and he seems like a nice guy. But then he immediately turns the other way when you see him start to play with a rattlesnake. Let me say this again. He decides to play with a rattlesnake. He knows the danger. He knows, but he's just, you know what? I'm gonna poke it with a stick. I'm gonna spit tobacco in its eye, and then I'm gonna pick it up, swirl it over my head, and throw it. And when the major calls him out on this and said, you should value your life more, there are people counting on you, he said, I don't care. It's just a rattlesnake. I mean, if something bad happens, something bad happens. And I'm like, are you an idiot? Like a complete idiot?
Even though some rattlesnakes are poisonous.
And this immediately leads to something else. So, like, the very next scene, he does this again. And he gets bitten, and they have to help him out and suck out the poison. And, I mean, thankfully he gets better later, but I'm like, from that point onward, I'm like, really? And he whenever the major tries to tell him not to be a goddamn idiot and play with a goddamn rattlesnake, especially when he just got bitten, he says, I'll do it again. The major says, don't do it, and he just says, don't tell me what to do. You're not my real mom. Like, what?
I was actually waiting for him to die. That actually would have been better. That would have been better if, like, they didn't get all the poison out and, like, there was a little bit left, and that's kind of killed him. Or weakened him so much that he couldn't be of any value to the group. Because that just would have been poetic.
I don't understand this guy. Like, I really don't. I don't understand what he's thinking. I don't understand why he would do this. I don't understand why the film would highlight this, because it's not funny. It's stupid. It's incredibly stupid. And eventually later, he takes a third of the party, and he says, we're just going to walk 75 miles through a desert, because that's the safer method than going 25 miles down a river.
Even though the general said that, if we stayed on the river, we actually could get there in a shorter amount of time. It was a shorter distance. But he was like, no, we don't want to take that risk. But getting back to them being killed by Indians, it's weird because we see the three guys who went the separate ways in a later scene, and they're all talking because the bearded guy could also talk Native American also, depending on whatever tribe it is, and he was able to communicate with them, telling them, like, no, we're not, no, we're here traveling, we're just travelers just passing through and stuff, and they were able to get through no problem. But then later we find out off screen that, those three died because they found their remains like a year later. I'm like, wait, what? I was like, wait, really? Like, they were able to communicate? I don't know.
This a lot of this film is very anticlimactic, and the ending especially. Like, it's just, hey, they got to the end of the river and the remaining 6 people survived, and hey, those other 3 people, they died. Bye, duh, end. Duh, end. So you have these bad character conflicts. You don't really have a plot, and the individual, like, character bits just don't amount to anything. It's very anticlimactic. The effect work. Let's talk about the effect work again. This is the most laughable effect work because I could do better. I mean, granted, I do have a green screen, but I've done better than this. Like, you have shots that are clearly them on the river, juxtaposed with shots of them, like you said, in front of like a matte painting or like just a background, and it's extremely obvious. And then they have like just them sprinkled with water from offset, and it looks wholly inauthentic. And then they keep splicing these 2 different sets of footage together so often that it stopped being funny, and it started to become sad, because like I was getting annoyed that they didn't see how bad these effects were, even for the time. Like I said, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea had better effect work, and this was like, what, 5-10 years before that?
Like about, I want to say about 10 years, about 10 years prior, and they still hold. And the funny thing is that those effects still hold up to this day. That's the funny thing about that. Unlike the effects in 10 Who Dared, where you look at this and like you could tell they're like you could easily tell they're two separate shots now, because like you could tell it's like, oh, this was shot on location and this was shot in a studio. Like you could easily tell what was where it was filmed just by looking at it.
It reminds me of I know you weren't there for this, but me and Kat reviewed a movie. I believe it was I'm not sure if it was Rob Roy or The Sword and the Rose, where there was one shot where extremely fake boulder came and started running down behind it. Like, these effects are so laughable, but they're throughout the entire film. And it's like, it's not like a blip you can just say, oh, it was just a bad effect and move on. Like, this is the entire film. And like watching it, that really, as someone who regularly edits and sees a lot of these flaws, I couldn't get past a lot of them because they're so glaring.
Yeah, I know. It's just, but you gotta laugh at that, because you could because of how much we know about filmmaking now, and looking at that, I'm just like what I remember when I saw a trailer for it, saw the preview of it on YouTube, and I'm watching the shot, and I'm like, oh, this, like, oh Jesus, like they're just throwing buckets of water at them, like, hey, we're going down the river. I'm just like, oh my God, this is like Swamp Diamonds. I'm like, if that was most of that film, I would say I probably would be laughing my head off on how that was not the intention. But here it's just because, I mean, that's only a small part of the film. I think that's only in like that one scene, maybe two scenes. But other than that, it's like everything else about the movie is just kind of meh. And I hate movies that are just meh.
There's also like a part where Major Powell goes up to check up on some geographical, like geological locations, some rocks and stuff like that. And he goes out, he's looking, and then he ends up slipping, and it's like, oh, he's like falling off a cliff. Now, this would have been tense if it was a cliff. At first, they're trying to make you think it's like a cliff, but his brother goes completely underneath him, right? And
yes,
he's like not even a foot. Like, it's something that he could easily drop down to. And his brother just goes underneath him, grabs his feet, and helps him down. And I'm like, you could have just dropped down.
To be fair, though, he only has one hand, so if he were to drop down, he would need both hands to like grab on to keep balance, and he only has one hand.
I guess, but like you could have just.
But even still, to your point, it's like he could have just slowly kind of dropped himself down.
It's like, I get they're trying to have this really tense moment. But then I'm looking at the set and how they show things, and I'm like, hi, hello? This is not a life-threatening thing.
It's like, oh, I'm hanging on. Just dropped it. And then the guy just goes underneath. All right, I got you. Okay. Well, that was an anti-cliffhanger.
So, yeah, the editing is very poor. The effect work is very poor. The characters are very poor. The acting is very poor because their accents just don't mesh with the characters. They're so fake, and they I can't see such a ragtag group of people just randomly going down a river. You have randomly an Englishman, an Irishman, someone from the north and the south. Like, okay, very random people going on this expedition. Okay, it's not believable. Like, the story's boring. The conflicts amount to nothing. I had so much trouble getting through this film. So much, because anytime something seemed like it would start to be happening and I'd start getting invested, it would end. And I would just have nothing to latch onto. There was nothing for this film for me to care about, which is why I was so upset. I'm still very angry that I paid $3 for this film. Thankfully, it wasn't $6 because there is no HD version of this film, thank God. But I paid $3 for this, and I feel like I should be paid $4 to have watched it. Like, I should have been paid.
I laughed. I cried. I kissed $3 goodbye. Although I wish I had those $3 back, but that's beside the point. Although I didn't really cry, but...
I think at this point, there's not too much more to say about the film in general. Like, anything that we could really delve in deep on, the film doesn't. Like, the film doesn't have enough depth for us to talk too much further. So, Eric, what are your final thoughts on this ridiculous film?
I feel like since Disney is still in its remake mode right now, you know what? I actually thought about this when I was watching the film, was that this film could have easily been remade. We could have remade this film today, especially with today's technology. Like, we could easily do that. I mean, look at The Revenant that came out last year. No, I was going to say 2 years ago. And that movie, it was like out in like the wilderness, and it was all intense and everything. And I was thinking like we could do like Disney could remake 10 Who Dared, but do it like Revenant style, where it's all like out in the wilderness and they're trying to fight for, they're fighting for survival while trying to go through this expedition, and there's mutiny, and there's mutiny, and they're like, can they really trust each other? It's like, how far will they go? Like, it could be a lot, it could be interesting, it could be intense, braving the forces of the wilderness with the Native Americans and like all this other things, something like that. But here, I mean, plus also remake. Plus, I don't mind seeing a movie that was bad being remade into something that was into something decent. That's just me. But with this film, there's potential, but they don't go deep enough. Like, while the valley in the films that we see are deep, but as far as the film itself with its character development and its plot, it doesn't go deep enough. I know it's the best wordplay I could think of, but yeah, it's a very hollow film. It's a pretty wide canyon. I'm just gonna stop now, but it's just, I wouldn't call it the worst film ever. I would just, I mean, it's just very bland. That's the best way I could say.
Well, overall, this film it upset me, just because there was nothing for me to latch on to whatsoever. And, it's not as bad as some of the worst films we've seen, but over the years we have seen worse and worse and worse Disney films, so it's kind of hard to compare sometimes. Honestly, this is mostly problematic because it's boring, but like, there's so many things that just, they don't even try, or if they did try, like, it doesn't show, because like there's all these things that could have been good, but they end up just being bad, just being ineffective, laughable. Just overall, there are things that should have been handled better but weren't. And unfortunately, this is the film we got. Is it the worst thing I've ever seen? No, but it's still infuriating. It infuriated me just because I saw how incompetent it was. And it was incompetent and boring. And that's not as bad as infuriating and boring, but it's very close. To me, this is like just underneath like the top worst films. It's not near as bad as, say, like the Shaggy Dog remake and stuff that we could go for hours on. I wouldn't even put it up with Maleficent, but I would definitely put it up with some of the just sheer incompetent and boring films that Disney has produced, and I never want to see this again.
No more boring frontier movies.
Yeah, when we found out it was like a frontier movie, I'm like, really? I thought we had gotten past this, because like we've had a string of good films. Toby Tyler may not have been the best, but we had Kidnapped, which I thought was mostly okay. We had Pollyanna, which was great. That was one of my favorite episodes to make. And then we have The Sign of Zorro, which was a really underrated gem of a film that people need to see. I thought we were on a roll here. You betray me. They betray me.
Why you betray me, Disney? I'm fed up with this world.
I'm fed up with this world.
Disney, you cray.
So yeah, guys, I don't have much more to say than that. This has been a very uneventful episode. This is just, there's not enough to latch on to. And unfortunately, this is one of those films where I would not even pay the $3 to watch it. Even more so than something like Toby Tyler. You don't waste your time, don't waste your money. If you can get it for free, fine. And if you're a hardcore Disney fan, whatever. Like, if you have to see every movie like we do, then, you know, if you have to see every movie, then maybe, but overall, this is not worth your time.
At least Toby Tyler, something was going on. Here, it's like, yeah.
Anyway, with all of that being said, I am Zenith will rule.
I'm Eric Y2 Staller.
And this has been 10 Who Dared. Just remember, guys, if something is labeled as one of the worst films of a company, I wouldn't advise seeing it. Have a good one, guys.
Take care.
Hey, this is Megami33. Thank you for watching Zenith Will Review. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more awesome videos. If you like what you see, check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/ZenithWillReview.